I'm sure by now you've heard of Skinamarink, a movie that's finally hit theaters after a wave of mass piracy following a leak from one of the festivals it played at, which naturally garnered a concurrent wave of think pieces about how this was the best thing that could have happened to it and word of mouth and all that. And if your knowledge about this movie is as extensive as mine was going in, then basically all you know about it is that it's actually scary. So allow me to fill you in. And if you've seen the movie, then forgive my redundancy, but that also means you know just how little there actually is to fill in. The logline you'll read on the internet will tell you that this movie is about two children waking up in the middle of the night to find that their father is missing, and all the windows and doors in their home have vanished. This is kind of true, but it's also not. There's been much debate as to whether or not this movie has a story, many in the camp of there's no story and it's just shots of walls, and many in the camp of there is a story hidden beneath this cryptic, often inscrutable rollout of information. And the thing is, they're both right. The movie's essentially a tone poem, translating the feeling of being up late at night as a kid, having to venture out of your bedroom and seeing things in the shadows, in which reality becomes warped, and we start to realize that we're in some hybrid of these grounded fears and a literal nightmare, following a dream logic that's naturally full of contradictions. We don't see faces, furniture and house layouts seem to shift around, sentences are only discernible about half the time, we fluidly move between the first and third person, and in the first person we toggle between two different characters. So there are scenes. Beats happen that are followed up on later where the consequences carry over, and that story is one of a monster or demon communicating with the kids and torturing them, none of which we actually see. But most of the movie takes place between the lines, consisting mainly of, yes, shots of walls and other home decor. But this is the foundation upon which the language of the film builds, and we start to mistake what we've perceived as walls for floors and carpets for ceilings, eliminating any sense of geographical safety we might have had. There are a couple big scares in this movie, but that purveying sense of dread is its bread and butter. There's a scene where the dad, who again sometimes has gone missing and sometimes hasn't, and whose face we don't see, asks the viewer, who in this particular scene is in the perspective of the little girl character, to look under the bed. And in this POV shot, we slowly look under the bed and then get back up after nothing happens. Director Kyle Edward Ball understands that it's not what's actually under the bed that matters, but our worst imaginations manifesting themselves in the moments leading up to it, and moments like that are where most of the movie's fear comes from. Despite apparently taking place in 1995, the movie's full of anachronisms. 1940s Fleischer cartoons are playing throughout the whole thing, toys of various time periods are scattered about, and this carries into the form as well. It takes very heavy steps to recreate the look and feel of an old 70s horror movie print, with extreme film grain and scratches overlaid, and a distorted, mono-mixed soundtrack. Because so much of the movie is lit by nothing but the TV light, and it's so underexposed, this heavy grain is where our eyes start to play tricks on us, and we start to see illusions in the movement of it, and make out cryptic faces in the shadows, even if that's not what they really are. Again, as we do when we're scared of the dark as kids. And the sound being as compressed as it is, not only gives everything a crunchy, piercing texture, but it makes any other real noises in the room stand out that much more. I am happy for Ball, for the popularity this film has garnered leading up to its release, but now that I've seen it, I'm a little conflicted about the fact that so many people have watched this movie at home. On one hand, I imagine watching this in a dark room with noises in your house can turn this into a sort of 4D experience, where the environment becomes an extension of the film and causes you to look at your own familiar surroundings in a new light. Not to mention the heightened sense of fear if you're watching it alone. So in that sense, this could be one of the few movies enhanced by home viewing. But on the other hand, there are moments here that I feel only hit for me as hard as they did because of the immersive atmosphere of the theater. There are really only 2 or 3 moments of overt scares, and because they're surrounded by such long, droning sequences of mild, slow burn ambience, when they do happen, it feels like someone is electrocuting you. And the 2 big ones I'm thinking of both consist of eye contact, to some degree with the audience. So for the few seconds these moments hold, it not only feels like being electrocuted, but like you're being held down and someone is sprinting towards you. They're not jump scares in the traditional sense, but they are sudden, extreme audiovisual stimulus, which feels a little jump scary. Bright, at times clipping light, and loud sustained noise that, with the mono mixdown, borders on ear rape levels. And that brings me to the real anachronism of this movie. All the physical stuff, props and set dressing and filters, can be justified through the nightmare logic where nothing really belongs anywhere. But I think there's something to be said for the context of horror that Ball is playing with here. Based on some interviews he's done, he clearly subscribes to the idea that wear and tear and the virtue of something becoming an artifact of time is a principal ingredient in something becoming creepy and unsettling. This explains much of the movie's approach, throwing a bunch of creepy old stuff in front of the camera, and not just emulating older formats themselves, but the weathering of these formats going through a projector over and over for 40 years and accumulating heavy scratches, which compounds on the film grain. This is Ball's way of essentially bypassing the latent period before a film becomes creepy by already employing what he finds creepy about those things today. But there are inescapably modern elements of this movie. The image isn't just dirtied by scratch and grain overlays, but by the digital ISO noise that's native in the modern camera he used. And I think there's something emblematic of the rest of the movie there, because on top of these old techniques, the movie's famously in conversation with horror trends of the internet. Ball has gotten a lot of his ideas from Reddit and YouTube comments, and the language of creepypastas is all about liminal spaces and old media. In other words, the very means by which Skinamarink pastiches older movies is itself a modern sensibility. And the winking quality this movie has during scenes where furniture appears and disappears, for instance, strikes me as a moment of particularly modern perspective. This sort of thing makes me wonder what the future of this movie looks like, and the future of all creepypasta adjacent media for that matter. Is it circumventing its own unique sense of aging by starting from a place of having already aged, thus limiting its potential to get creepier with time, as Ball suggests is the process? Or in 40 years, will there be a clearly identifiable 2010s, 2020 sensibility about these things in conversation with older media? The hope would be that that sensibility itself gets creepier as these movies themselves become older media, sprouting a uniquely uncanny sense of facsimile of a facsimile. But it's also possible that starting from a supposed endpoint for the media is a form of self-sabotage, and there's really no way to know how these things will age. We can infer based on past movements, but only time can really tell. As it stands, I really appreciate what this movie's doing, but I don't know if it all works in a feature-length format. Those few brief flashes did scare me like no other movie has in years, but they only have that effect because of how much time is spent on slow, static architecture. I respect the commitment to the language Ball establishes here, and how he plays with space and nightmare logic. But even for those moments where the terror of suggestion in the dark really works, there is a lot of runtime where I'm not seeing anything in the shadows, and I'm not getting any new information about the space to contradict later. And it's tough because I think a lot of this boring material, for lack of a better term, is necessary for the highs of this film to hit like they do. But walking out of it, I don't know if the net result of those highs is entirely worth what the movie asks the audience to endure in the meantime. Maybe for that reason, it actually would have hit harder if I'd watched it at home and became scared of my own bedroom. But if it was already testing my attention span in the theater with no distractions around me, I don't even want to attempt home viewing. So even though not everything about Skinamarink worked for me, I do appreciate it as a translation of that online culture into the realm of feature films. I appreciate it as a crowd-funded independent film that does something unique with the camera that would be novel on any budget level. And I'm excited to see where Ball goes from here, evolving from making online shorts into a filmmaker with the kind of stamina to sustain a feature. I'm hopeful that he only gains more stamina and makes films that build on the language we see here, but with maybe a little more stimulus. And of course, this is just how the movie's tricks worked for me. I know a lot of people were much more consistently sustained throughout the movie. Let me know how it worked for you. Is this a boring piece of shit? Is it a triumph of slow cinema? Is it a pop bastardization of slow cinema? Is it not actually slow at all, and instead a riveting experience that had you holding your breath the whole time? I want to know. Until then, links are in the description. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.